There I am.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah. Uh Getting darker and darker outside. That's kind of depressing me a bit, but
It is. I have to bring a lamp in because I'm like my light source is gonna deplete.
normally I'd be in the office, but it's like I got more light in here and I guess the art is nicer.
That is some good art. I have Hamilton, which is now like probably not the best thing because we found out that he possibly owned slaves. So it's not there, but I have a lot. I have press credentials. I'm still getting used to this press credentials.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, how many you got there? Looks like I don't know, seven, eight.
The press credentials,
Yeah.
maybe 30 or so. I
Wow.
haven't gotten a credential in a long time, but like I went through this phase in my photography where I thought that I had to take pics of celebrities and stuff to like do something big. So I racked up. A lot of these were finessed, and it did nothing for my life. Nothing
Having
for my
press
life.
passes.
Like taking photos of celebrities and all that kind of stuff. Like that, you know, having a photo of Chance the Rapper does not make your career. I learned that early on.
Right. That actually goes into my first question. So that's a good transition.
Ha,
Uh
ha, ha, ha.
how I was curious as to how you got into photography, number one, and then number two, like how you got into photojournalism specifically.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this exhibit and to be here today just to talk about the book and all things photography. Media and photography has been something that's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I started off with Kodak disposable cameras. And one thing that you know about disposable cameras is you have a certain number of shots, around 30 or so, and you also don't get to see that photo right away. You have to, take it to Walgreens, get it developed. So you're waiting a few days to see what you shot. And I've always been someone who wanted to document the moment, capture what I see, what's going on, and just get that moment in time in history. So I started out learning the value of a photograph because nowadays, I have a digital camera. I can shoot 1,000 photos and pick the best one. I can take a photo, look at it. Oh, I don't like it. Take it again. I don't like it. Take it again. But my base of photography was finding that moment, not wasting that shot. And it progressed from there. For Christmas one year when I was younger, I got a little camcorder, which I still have. It doesn't work, but I still have it. And I was able to do photos and videos. And when I got into high school, I saw my very first DSLR in person. Love at first sight. Another student had it. Hey, what is that? Can I use that? And I just started to take photos around the school. I started to train other students in photography. I didn't know much at the time, but I knew enough just to get a good photo using different automatic modes at that time and just starting to progress more and more into it. People hype me up a lot, classmates telling me, oh, I love your photos. I love your shots. I love what you're doing. You have an eye. I didn't really see it at first, but I just really kept going with it because photography is what I honestly enjoy doing. I would be that kid at homecoming with my camera. Seriously, I didn't go to homecoming and like dance and party. I would go to homecoming and take photos of other people having fun. But
Mhm.
I had fun doing that. I had fun documenting their moments. So through that, I just knew that I liked all realms of photography that dealt with like events, action, sports, and just capturing that human spirit. So when it comes to like the protest aspect of it, that is one aspect of what I do with my photography realm. And as you can see on my Instagram, my social media channels, I photograph everything.
Mhm.
Protests are just the one thing that really stuck this summer just because of how much of an unprecedented moment it was. But
Right.
my entire thing was photographing it all.
And so, would you say then that you consider yourself more of like an artist or than a photojournalist? And I just asked that question because when I was going through the book, I was just struck by a lot of like the shots. There seemed like it was more like an artist soul than someone who's just like taking a shot, to document the events going on over the summer. Though it certainly does that, and it does it very well.
Yeah, so there's the aspect to it, and I've been around news photographers, so I know how to cover an event and that aspect of it. And there's also that artistic form to it of trying to play around with light, trying to play around with shadows. and make an interesting photo. So I would definitely just make that distinction from just anyone with a camera going out to capture the photos. But I am a professionally trained photographer, use a high quality top of the line gear with that professional training to bring that aspect that you typically see in news photography with those staff photographers. So I'm doing that same kind of work.
So it's like a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Since I'm independent.
And then 100 pages worth of shots. That's a lot of shots. And so I just got to ask the question about like how many photos of the protest over the summer do you think you have?
They're around 17,000
Wow.
photos just from the end of May to September.
Okay.
And from August to September, there was I know that especially at the beginning of September, there was a big break. But right here on these hard drives lives around 17,000 photos from the summer. Didn't delete. They're all here.
And so when you're like doing projects, going through all those photos, what is your selection process like? Like, what are you looking for as far as a shot that you feel like is, worth showing more people than, just yourself?
So there's a two-step process to it. Most important is when I go to these protests, there's a mission and there's a goal. How can I most accurately capture what they have? So there's one of the protests in the book from the Break the Piggy Bank protest where the entire idea of it was a symbolic moment of breaking this piñata that was shaped out to be like a police officer, and that represented the police department's budget. They broke it open and like objects fell onto other pieces that replicated and resembled what that money could have went towards. So I knew there was a rally in the beginning, there was a march, that moment happened, they marched back, they circled up. 5 moments, if I only had one, it had to be the physical breaking of the piggy bank because that is what they wanted to show. And on top of that, the other thing was what best describes this energy here. So all of the decisions for this book were made myself. I didn't have an editor. There was no team. All of that was me. So I know how it felt to be there. I know what moments really captured it all. Look at the Logan Square lockdown. That was one of the biggest moments of the summer. And the protest itself was not meant to be what it became. They had a rally at the Logan Square Monument. They marched as close to the mayor's home as they can get. But then after we got the news that the mayor planned on removing the Columbus statues, it turned into a celebration. So that entire purpose shifted. And I knew that the energy that day was happy, fun, dancing, and capturing that. And then when you have protests, there's a lot of speeches, there's a lot of talking. So I'm trying to figure out what makes this one different, right? Yeah. I could have did all of these demonstrations, just showed you some shots of someone speaking. That doesn't really capture it that much. So I'm also looking at that. I'm looking at what news coverage and what people have not seen yet to just give you that additional part of completing the story.
And so you mentioned, because I like the Break the Piggy Bank. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I really dug those photos too, just because of how like unique that was as like a protest statement. But I wonder if there any other moments over the summer and the fall that stood out to you in particular in terms of really enjoyed covering, or you really got to know the subjects.
Yeah, so let's talk about the cover of the book. And there are a ton of reasons why I chose it. So I have the book here. And, with this cover photo, there is just a lot happening here. But what I enjoyed about it the most was one of the captions for this photo was I called it the modern day sit-in. Because you look at what sit-ins are historically, you occupy a space, you don't leave until your demands are met. Typically, people are assaulting you, they're pouring liquids on you, they're beating you, you get forcibly removed. And this modern day sit-in, you come to someone's place and you have a dance party. You're hanging out, you're having fun, and you're taking up that space in that moment. What I also loved about it was the fact that I wasn't always downtown the Loop. One of the main criticisms of protests is, why don't you go to your own neighborhoods? You look in this book, I list every single neighborhood that I was in for that specific photo. I went all across the city this summer.
Yeah.
And what that means with me going all across the city is there are actions all across the city. So the cover of the book is on the west side in the Austin neighborhood. not down in some loop. And it's also a lot of young people there. So that's one of the things that really struck me. Outside of the loop, I spent the most time in Inglewood. The most photos in this book are from Inglewood. That's the second most shown neighborhood in here. So really just seeing that all out aspect of it. But of course, one of my top moments from the summer is the title page of the book, which is the dreadhead cowboy riding his horse on the Dan Ryan. That's like, come on now, once in a lifetime kind of deal.
Yeah. I those shots were really great too, just in terms of, you know, the action of it. But then I started thinking about like how then well, first of all, like going back to like June, July, how there was this rumor that he had stole that horse from the police.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when it actually it's his own horse. Yeah. And then I thought about like he ended up getting like arrested and charged with like animal like cruelty for like doing that. And so it just raised this question about like I guess like how people are trying to get attention to this cause, which to your point, like I was going through the book and that's the thing that struck me the most, is that you really did go everywhere and you did see like a broad, you know, intersectional, like everybody in Chicago across the board seems like they really want to change the city's relationship with police and kind of de-escalate the police's influence on I guess the city and like, you know, the people who live in the neighborhoods. And so I was wondering what gave you the inspiration or the idea to do a book about protests? Like what got you? Were you already protesting, you just happened to be there, or is this something that you actively like thought about documenting because nobody else was doing it? Or
So you really just brought up the entire reason why this book was needed. You mentioned the dreadhead cowboy, and you mentioned two moments. Folks thought he stole the horse. That was national news. And number two, the Dan Ryan. What's missing in there is that he held two marches in the community shortly before the Dan Ryan march. He was in Woodline with the Kids Lives Matter march, and he was in Inglewood with the Kids Lives Matter march. I'm the only person that covered both of them. For the first one in Woodline, no one covered it but me. For the second one, we had one news outlet. City of 2.7 million people, no news outlets came. Mainstream, indie, no independents were out there. So one of the things that we see a lot in Chicago is people go out and they peacefully protest and they make these different demands for whatever they're trying to change, but it doesn't get attention. Folks aren't thinking about it. It's not newsworthy. So what he went on the Dan Ryan for was the exact same thing he was in Inglewood for and in Woodlawn for, where he actually had kids with him marching and dancing, but no one knows about that.
right.
So when you think about history, 50 years from now, I'm not going to do it. I don't expect anyone to scroll through 50 years of my Twitter to try to see what happened here in 2020. You know, we're a few months removed from it, and I still would not scroll through all of that. You probably can't even get that far. So when we look at what happens in the past, automatically we look at, oh, what the news say. The news coverage has it. The Chicago Tribune has an entire Instagram account called Vintage Tribune, where someone's job is just to post old photos. We don't have that in our own, you know, personal documentation of what's going on and what's happening. So there's this idea of who gets to write our history books. Why is it someone who is not present at these actions writing the history book? Why is someone else telling our story? Right. So what I wanted to show here was we can make our own history books. I put this book together myself. I self-published it. And now this is going to be a record of the times for generations to come, because right now we're such a digital world. Everything we do, we put online. The internet can go away today. Your account, my account, anyone's account can be suspended with a click of a button. And all of that history is gone. But with the book, you can't destroy that. You have that book out here. All across the country, this book is spread. So I know that we'll have that physical first-person account, that primary source of what's going on. So I felt it was definitely more important to put this in people's hands, because I knew if I kept it on Twitter, if I kept it on Instagram and Facebook, it will go as far as my circle and as far as that retweet, as far as that share. But I know for a fact that people are seeing this book physically who would have never seen my social media, who wouldn't have never come across this work. It's able to spread much more, and people really When it's tangible, it's just much easier to grasp and know that it's real when you see it in your hand in front of your face.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And there is like a sense that, you know, the news and certainly like, you know, the people who are in charge of, you know, protecting the city, like their narrative is different than, you know, your average person on the streets narrative. And so, you know, it's, I dig that it's like serving as an intermediary. And so, you know, it's just, you know, trying to create a more cogent narrative than you would get from the top down.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I thought about Dreadhead Cowboy, and I also thought about the photos that you took of like the looting, which ended up like overtaking like a lot of the conversation. And so, you know, on the south and west side, you've got like photos of, you know, looted like convenience stores and like beauty supply stores. And then like the one, my favorite was the one with you know, black owned, like Black Lives Matter, like when it's boarded up. And then you go, you know, you go to the Gold Coast and those shots where it's, you know, a completely different um it's a completely different, like, you know, it's like looted like department stores, like I think it's like a Macy's and like a jewelry store.
Yeah.
And so, but they're treated like the value is the same, like to the community. If someone loots, you know, a Macy's, it's treated exactly the same. If somebody loots like a local like store in a community. And I started thinking about that, and I wanted to ask you about um it was related to like in the summer, like at least that's how it felt to me, like in the summer, like June, you know, July, August, it really felt like things were going to move in a certain direction. And then all of a sudden the narrative changes and it's like, you know, looting is wrong, like send in the troops and all that stuff. And I just wanted to think or ask you, because you were like on the ground, you know, like documenting all of this, what your opinion was about where Chicago movement politics is, and do you think the narrative of like progressive change is kind of slowed down, or do you think it's kind of gone underground again, or you have a sense of that?
The news cycle changes so fast, it's really hard to get a grasp of what's going on and what's happening and what people think at that moment. But what's important to keep in mind in all of this is all the folks on the ground, we only have so much power that we can physically change ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's like when you look at what people are fighting for in Chicago with defunding the police, there was one person in the entire city of Chicago who has to be convinced, and that's the mayor. It doesn't matter how many tens of thousands of people come out. It doesn't matter how many news articles come out or what anyone thinks. There's one person who is a decision maker on that. So it's like that energy and that power, it's really easy to feel defeated. So it's just, you know, very encouraging to see people still going out, still fighting and trying to figure out in what ways we can make this change and what ways we can have this go. But when it comes for the narrative, I felt it was very important for me to show it all, right? I could have said, this is a book only about joy, and I could have kept out the Trump rally.
Right.
I could have kept out the law enforcement rally where you see a photo of a Black Lives Matter supporter and a Trump supporter physically in an altercation. I have both incidents of looting in the book. So I knew that I can tell the entire story and still the point that it was built on joy and love and peace and building community, it still stands. So that's why all of the captions in the book, it's no opinions here. I give you the date, the neighborhood, what's happening, that person's name if I know it. And when I took a step back from it, I saw that like more often than not, it was joy. And that's why that was the lead of the book. That's why that was the title. But it's not a narrative and a spin because you're allowed to have your own discussions about this. So I always look at when people leave reviews, people talking about the book, because there's so many observations you can draw. Someone can do an entire study on how the demographics shift. If you go from May 30th and then you go until the end of the book, look at the age ranges, it changes. Look at the ethnicity, it changes. Look at who's coming out and when you see these people and what you see them out and what they represent, because we're such a diverse city in Chicago that this book isn't just about police protest. there are protests for everything in this book, and everyone came out for whatever their issue was, and they talked about it. And I really tried my best to get out and cover as much of it to give you just that full picture of what happened over the summer.
Yeah, I wanted to actually talk about like all of that at different points, but I guess I'll start with the police side. Like one of the things that struck me was number one, how a lot of the photos that you took were like adversarial towards the police. Like, I mean, I think on like the second page, it's like a standoff with police. And then for those of you like at home who you don't know, Homan Square, which there was a black site in Homan Square for the Chicago police where they had like, detain people and, torture people into confession, to just hold people without access to the lawyers, things like that. And so you had the photos from Freedom Square. And I thought about like that, like, and how adversarial like Chicago's relationship is with the police, like, especially, black or brown communities. But then there's also these other people who are in support of police, and that might be because they're self-interested. It might be like a police thing where your dad might be a policeman, or your uncle might be a policeman, and you're just trying to show support or solidarity for that. But then I also thought that the people just really might be like scared, like they don't necessarily know what a community situation in terms of like crime or security with the police like looks like. And so do you feel as though Chicago is moving in the right direction as far as communities actively imagining what less of a police presence would look like? Or did you get a sense of people like talking about the possibilities of that when you were out taking photographs?
So there are two Chicagos, right? The Chicago that you see in this book is different from the Chicago that you see in leadership. There was this overall theme that I saw with a lot of the protests that were led by Black organizers of this idea that we keep us safe. So at all of the protests, they were very, 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 very planned out. So you had people whose job was to keep everybody fed. As you go along the march route, there are people giving you water, giving you snacks, giving you food. There were bike marshals. So there were people that came out, typically white folks, they were allies, and they would bring their bikes and be in between the police officers and the demonstrators to keep that line of protection. The same thing in the neighborhood. There's this idea of, you don't need the police. You can handle conflicts yourself. Out of all the demonstrations that I've been to, there was never one moment where there was a fight between demonstrators. If there was any type of flare-ups, there were anyone coming in who was an agitator, the demonstrators themselves took care of that. The organizers took care of that. Back to the Logan Square lockdown, there's a point, this is actually in my Twitter thread, where a guy who was anti what the demonstration was about got right in front of it, got right in the middle of it. And actually there's another moment of this towards the back of the book that I really made sure I wanted to highlight this fact. They had a protest. This is one of the Cops Out CPS protests in front of the CPS board headquarters. So you have, one person here on the mic, and then you have a Blue Lives Matter supporter that just completely crashed the entire circle with this sign, recording everybody. You come right in the middle, and where's the police at? Right, where is the police to diffuse that? You have the people themselves having to take care of this, having to remove that person, having to talk that person down. So you see right there that the community is able to take care of themselves. The other thing about it is, if you look at the entire summer and you look at conflict, 10 times out of 10, it was police versus civilians.
Right.
There was never a moment where the civilians were fighting themselves. The cover of the book, all of these people are here. There were no police officers because the police officers left after they were trying to lock folks up for being in the street. So every single time, and that's why this police argument comes about, the only time there's been conflict is police officers. You mentioned the Freedom Square rally at the Homan Square Black site. I was really, really, really annoyed with the police department because there were hundreds of people taking up that space, having that event, 100% peaceful. And then across the street, the police officers line the entire block with shields in their riot gear. And it's like, why are you here to basically provoke them because people felt unsafe with their presence and you felt the energy change? And one of my questions for like the police department is like, who are you here to protect? Mm-hmm. Because you guys are here with your riot gear. These demonstrators are not going to fight anyone but you. So if you all are not here, there is no one to have conflict with. So a lot of it was just taking on those layman, not even just like the history of police and just this overall aspect, but just very simple. They don't like you. You're here. This causes conflict. If you leave, there is no conflict. So that was one of the things that I saw a lot when it comes to just that dynamic between police officers and civilians.
That's really interesting. And that's like clarifying like a lot of things for me, because my wife and I tried to go to I live in Bridgeport, and my wife and I tried to go to the police protest at the police headquarters in Bronzeville. And, you know, the police had like just had 35th blocked off, mm-hmm. and we just got spit out east. And then when we got on, you know, 31st Street again, it's just, you know, like a bunch of just dudes from the block, like predominantly white, like bats, you know, like table legs, like trying to protect the neighborhood. And that didn't really surprise me if you know the history of Bridgeport, right? But what did surprise me was that the police were just basically allowing that to like happen instead of trying to de-escalate a situation. It just kind of, you know, it made me think about like what the police department in Chicago's priorities are versus, you know, what they should be doing in the name of the taxpayer, you know, that type of thing. But like what you mentioned that there were protesters, you know, like there were Trump protesters, there were like, you know, Blue Lives Matter protesters. Did you see a lot of that, or was that like a minority voice in Chicago? Because the argument is always, you know, or at least the one they've been trying to push like as of lately, that there's like a silent majority of people who want like law and order, like whatever, but that, you know, is very few people in to like make themselves vocal. But I wonder in Chicago if that is the case, or, you know, if more, you know, did you see a lot of like protesters, or I guess in this case it would be like counter protesters, right? Like, did you see a lot of that?
Rarely. You know, the photo that I showed you, there was one person. And every time there was so in this book, there are two. There's the Trump rally, which I have to just make the note. This wasn't Chicago specific. This is a national traveling rally. Like the organizers literally go across every major city in the country. And they hold this. It's called the Walk Away Rally, walk away from the Democratic Party. The law enforcement rally happened in response to the actions of the Columbus statue. There was one more Trump rally that I was unable to make it to, so I want to also mention that one. All of those had counter protesters, all of them. The other side, the majority of the book, no counter protesters were there. Unless it was just like one simple person. And that's why I talk about this idea. There are two Chicagos, like the people and the governmental system. And this isn't opinion based. There's a photo that floated around some weeks ago of the mayor sitting next to the results of the budget survey. Mm-hmm. And like 90% of the people said reallocate funds from the police department. This survey was for the entire city of Chicago, and 90% said take funds and defund police. So it's like, it's really hard to make those arguments when it's like the numbers are there, the facts are there, the photos are there. So all of these conclusions you can draw, but if you're willing to accept the truth for what it is.
Yeah, that's interesting too, what you said about like two Chicagos, and like, you know, what Lori Lightfoot got elected on was, you know, the sort of like uniting like neighborhoods and making the city like more lateral, which is important. But what you're talking about, what I think about more often, is that what I always say, that the city of Chicago is not worthy of the people of Chicago, because there's people in Chicago who are like trying to do like the right thing and like good like all the time, but the city keeps falling short in terms of, you know, supporting them and making sure that regardless of where you're from in the city, you have like, you know, a stake in the city, and you can, you know, look at that whatever angle you want. Like the one that I think about the most is how, I'm from Great Migration ties, from Mississippi to Chicago, and like the fact that the city's Black population is like in steadily decline, that just makes me really like sad and like concerned about what the city is going to look like as far as like attracting not just diverse residents, but how the downtown agenda might be prioritized over like what was always considered, a neighborhood city, right? So like you'll traffic in the neighborhoods, you'll put up the banners, right? But like there's little or no investment in what the neighborhoods actually want or neighborhoods actually need. But you went everywhere, and I was really grateful to see that experience. Like you went into like tons of different neighborhoods, and you're right, like everything that you documented, there were like queer protests, there were, Black Lives Matter protests, there were like defund the police protests, and they all intersect just based on people demanding more from municipal government, but it wasn't as if it was like a blanket, one thing, to where if you like, to your point about the media earlier, if you like look at the news or what have you, it's always a situation where it's like it's the looters or like the lawlessness versus people who just want order, that type of thing.
And one of the common chants is called "No justice, no peace."
Yeah.
And it's like, if we don't get what we want, what we need, shut it down. So you have to look at the basis of what are they asking for? They're asking for to not be over policed. Like, is that a very hard thing to think about? So you look at what they're coming from and what they're asking for in here. But when it comes like more the downtown region, I would also just have to add that there's the economic aspect to it. I think the city has admitted this before, that the majority of the money in this city is coming from downtown. It's coming from the up north areas. So there's also this idea that we have to protect that because we have to protect the economy of Chicago. So there's a lot to it, and that's why this book here can be a discussion piece on that. And I didn't want to, too much inject my views into the book itself, because as an author of the book, it's like whatever I say is automatically considered what's right. So I wanted to make sure that this can be a discussion piece and you can use that facts and that truths to have more of an understanding of what goes on, what happens here. And this is a book for everybody. This isn't a book where police officers can't also buy and enjoy the book. They can do it too. Everyone, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think you can appreciate the entire scope of the summer and have just that humanity of, all right, they're just dancing. How can I hate that so much?
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Yeah, it's not, you don't take a side. You encourage. You said something earlier that like stuck with me during this conversation, that like you're just encouraging a dialogue or like a discussion about what happened, and like a real discussion, not just, sometimes the local discussion gets filtered through the national conversation, and like certain like nuances and stuff got lost. But to that point, one thing I noticed also in the book is a lot of protests in Chicago in solidarity for people who had experienced police brutality in other cities. I'm not sure if you have how many people you encountered who were from out of town, but did you get a sense that Chicago was kind of, I don't want to say doing the heavy lifting, but as being like the largest Midwestern city, just kind of taking up all those like issues on their shoulders and trying to like, lead with regards to like getting out in the streets?
Yeah, so Chicago is one of the largest cities in the country. So automatically people are looking to see, what is Chicago doing? What are we talking about? Because we have so many people that can mobilize and do so much. And with the protests and the civil unrest all over the country, we've seen much smaller cities do more than Chicago did. Look at Kenosha. They burned down entire, buildings that belong to, law enforcement officials in that city. And you look at places like Portland, where every single day they're out there protesting. So Chicago is such an easygoing city that you didn't even see every single day something happening. You didn't see civil unrest all the time. You had the 2 incidents of looting, but there was a lot of moments where we're just like not ready to react in that anger and that aggression. We saw it recently the day after the election when people thought that there were going to be protests and looting because of the election results. All throughout the Mag Mile, it's boarded up. All in the loop is boarded up. And there was no looting. There were no attempts of looting. Thousands of people came downtown to protest the day after the election. I was there, and they all left with no problems. And I went down to the Mag Mile, and it's like, look at this. All this is boarded up. The Apple Michigan Avenue store literally was a fort. It had huge 8-foot gates around the entire complex with security roaming for nothing. So you look at us as like these animals that are going to loot, that are going to steal, and you spend all of this money to board it up, and none of that happens. So it really does something to people's morale when you're looked at with such low regard from the people that reside in the same city as you do.
Mm. Yeah, I was reading. I forgot who the author was, but it was the notion that if people were boarding up, because of Trump, and I was like, none of this has to do with like Trump at all, like he just happens to be there. Like what we're talking about has been, going on for like quite some time, like regardless of, who the president is or, what the circumstances in the country. It just seemed like a very like simplistic way of looking at it. But again, the national conversation wants to just kind of digest everything into, like a hero villain narrative, right? It doesn't necessarily get you any closer to the truth. And what we haven't talked about though, the fact that you're doing all of this during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's another like thing that I've seen, like watching like the news in terms of like Congress and like in what's going on Capitol Hill and stuff like that, where there's this notion, I can't go to church or I can't get a haircut, but these protesters can go out in the street. So what was your sense of how people in Chicago were like contending with the fact that on the one hand, you do feel like it's the right thing to do to get out on the streets, but on the other hand, it's the middle of a pandemic and people are trying to stay safe?
So I can cut my ceiling light on and give some more lighting here. Would that mess up the edit if?
No. Ian's gonna fix, whatever, like the cuts or, the video. We should be okay.
Got a little dark in here. Just want to kind of match that lighting.
Yeah.
Okay. You're on a desk, so I have like a lamp that I'm just shuffling around here. All right. There we go. You asked about the pandemic?
Yeah, right. Like what, because people are protesting in a pandemic and, on the one hand, there's a need or a desire to be in the street to kind of show like voices for, racial justice. But on the other hand, it's the middle of the pandemic. So just like asking if you had a sense of, how people were taking steps to protect themselves, or like, what was your sense of like how, cautious people might have been or might not have been, when you were like documenting the protests?
So you definitely saw that throughout just the book itself. If you look at the very first protest that I covered on May 30th, thousands of people were there. The second weekend, 38,000 people. We never saw that again. So the numbers just gradually got cut lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, where I'm going to actions where maybe 50 people would show up. And a lot of that was people had that fear of, this virus is rapidly increasing. The other thing was, you can look throughout the book and see that people are wearing their masks. There is some social distancing going on, but folks are wearing their masks and they're trying to take those precautions. A lot of it is being around some of the same people, so you kind of get like this core group that you're with, that you're hanging out with, because you can be at a protest with 1,000 people, but just stay around your close group of whoever you came with or just whoever you're around, because you're all moving together as a unit. So it wasn't the same thing like going to a bar, having your face mask off, sharing a meal, and really spewing those just those airborne droplets to each other. But I do think there were a lot of reasons why the crowd size dropped, and I won't accredit that to just people didn't care anymore. But I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
we have to figure out that we're in here. I actually got a comment before from a guy who told me that he's like 70 years old, he's a leukemia patient, but he's a Chicago photographer who has been covering protests for a very long time. And as much as he wanted to go out this summer, he couldn't, just because he is, so at risk. He just couldn't take that risk of going out. So I know a lot of people have that kind of same experience of that's why they didn't come out, but that's why they came out. And then they decided to be, do their activism and their work in a different way than physically being in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear, like, both that people were like staying safe, and that the people who were going to like rallies or protests were like protecting themselves, because everything that I've heard, like the virus spread is very low, like from protests. But I was just trying to get your sense of it, on the ground.
I've been to dozens and I haven't gotten it, so I think that's also something that we should know.
Yeah.
If anyone is the number one contender to have it, would be me, but no.
The other photos that I think, there were only like a handful, but they really stuck out to me, both in light of the pandemic and just in general, of how like segregated the city is, and not just on like racial lines, but also on like socioeconomic lines. I was watching. I don't know if you happen to see that National Geographic documentary, "City So Real," which is about yeah, okay, and how everyone's talking about Laquamic Down. You go to the west side or go to the south side, and then there's the scene where the reporter goes to Lincoln Park and they just ask people about Laquamic Down, right? And it's like, well, I don't really know. Like, I haven't really had a chance to look at that. It just really was.
They're afraid to talk about it on camera.
You think that's what it is?
Some of them, like one person said that they don't have enough information to comment.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Okay. I think. Yeah. Okay. But I thought about that in relation to the photos that you were taking, where it's people sitting at restaurants or like dining and they're looking out of the window.
Yeah.
And yeah, because if this is gonna be a thing where people are really trying to like lower police budgets and change the Chicago Police Department's relationship with community, that's going to have to be like citywide. And I thought about what happened in Minneapolis too, where there was a demand or like a desire for that, but then there wasn't necessarily like a plan of like what's going to happen, and now the people who like agreed to it because they were riding the political wind have like buyer's remorse. And so I just like wondered if you had a sense of how eager people, for regardless of socioeconomics or like ethnicity or whatever, were like willing to reimagine the CPD's relationship with communities.
It's tough, and it's tough to imagine change. So you think about slavery. At the time, people thought that a world without slavery would not exist. And abolishing slavery was like this crazy idea. So even now, it's like that same idea of, imagine a world, and not necessarily without police. That's one way to look at it, or just with less police. But think about it in your own life. When is the last time you called the police? When's the last time you needed police? When is the last time that they physically came to you and interacted with you? So it's like, as a Black person in America, when police officers approach you, you're not like, oh my God, I feel so safe right now because, the people are here to serve and protect me, but you feel a sense of fear. So if you don't grow up like that, it's really hard to just imagine that. But there's this other thing about just being so disconnected to other humans. So if you think about one of the times where I got a shot of people dining during a protest, that was, when the decision came out about Breonna Taylor. And we found out that they were not going to get charges for killing her. So it's like, all right, even if you don't agree with anything about what we're saying with police and defunding and abolishing, can we at least agree on the grounds that you should have a consequence for coming in someone's home
Sure.
and killing them? So it's like we can't even agree on that aspect. There's only so much that we can do. But I do have to give it up to our white allies. We had a lot out here, but most importantly, young people are important. Even myself, my views are not the same as my parents.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my parents and I have disagreeing views on many things, especially dealing with politics. So knowing that we have a lot of young people out here getting in this work, having these ideas, just wait on it. When we get old enough to get into the leadership positions ourselves, that change will come. But right now, we're kind of in that moment of still the same old ideas are the ones that are in charge, that are in power. And as time goes on, we weed those out. A new wave will come in. But because of the protests, because of the demonstrations, that new wave is coming in a lot earlier than expected.
Yeah, that's a really great answer, and like the fact that it's not a top down, but it's like a bottom up in terms of like, youth and like impact. I think that's a side of it that people aren't necessarily taking seriously, or if they are, it's in a way that's like, they're just young and, immature, and they'll change, like that type of thing, instead of actually trying to listen to what people are saying to them. But
Mm.
those shots in particular really struck me, because if we're talking about, pandemic politics, it's on the one hand, you know businesses need to stay open, but on the other hand, like, what are people's priorities? Like, is it more important like to protest, or is it more important, you know to go out to eat or keep businesses open? It just really made me think about, how much work there is to be done as far as convincing people of the change that people want to see, if that
Mm.
makes any sense.
Yeah, and it's also just like the notion of there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it's important to take care of yourself. Yes, you deserve a meal. Yes, you deserve a night out. But on this day, at this time, is that the best thing to do? And it may not be the best thing to do at that specific moment. So it's all about symbolism. It's all about representation. When people look at what's happening in Chicago, you see two things: photos and videos. That's it. So it's like, what's the optics of this? Like, how does this look when we have some folks protesting and you're sitting here eating? You don't know what was going on before that photo, after that photo, or during that photo, besides what you see. But at one of those diners, both of those moments, some of the diners were cheering. Yeah, I agree with you. Rock on. I stand with you. I'm with you. But if you don't get up,
Mm-hmm.
the optics change. So if you think back 50 years, if you think back 100 years, we don't know what was happening in that moment. Only thing that we know is what that photo shows, what that video shows, what that written account shows. So it's more of just that optics of it. So we're trying to get people to think more about, yeah, actions speak louder than words, right? Getting up from this table and joining this protest really shows what you're about more than whatever you think you're doing. So all of this can be attacked in different ways. And back on your point about young people, I'm 21 years old. I turned 21 on June 1st. So I started this coverage when I was 20 years old. No affiliation with any media outlet. So it's like, how does this 21-year-old photographer, not hired by any news outlet, come out here, cover this stuff, and just take over the entire coverage? People were looking at me for what I'm doing. News outlets, the same outlets that I was coming out here with, covering alongside, are now covering me, are now doing stories on me. So I want young people to realize the power that they have, the
Yeah.
power of voices, the power that you can do it without thinking that you need certain requirements, without looking at the gatekeepers. You can come out with your phone. When I started this a few months ago, I had 1.5 thousand followers on Twitter. In 2 months, gained 10,000 followers, which showed that that work was there. So I didn't start off with a platform, but all of that grew. On the night of the Logan Square lockdown, I gained 3,000 followers in that one night. So that just really shows that there's a need for this work. and that individuals have enough power to go out and do it without worrying about what you see or what someone else did, because we all have to start from somewhere.
What is your sense of responsibility regarding that, though? And I ask this in the context of there was the story, I forget the name, but there was the story that the Chicago police like killed someone, and it ended up like not being. I mean, it's seriously injured, right? But it's like, there's the rumor that was spreading on social media that this person got killed, and so the city reacts to that, and it ends up not being true. And in no way am I saying that it's worth it not to document than to document. But I just wonder, from your perspective, someone, who is being reached out from or to by the media for like both profiles, and also I would imagine like people might want to buy photos from you, right? And so like, what is your responsibility with regards to, both as someone who people look to for the truth, and also in regards of what you choose to, share or sell with people, like if you choose to?
It's very important to get the truth out. Very important to know the entire story. One of the skills you have to have as a journalist is being able to harness your emotions in a way that you're not immediately reacting off of what you're just feeling in that moment, but you make sure the facts are right. I remember I was at a protest and we all got pepper spray. Now at that time, I made a tweet immediately and I said tear gas. Tear gas and pepper spray are two different things. So like kind of going off that emotion, it's like, oh my God, we were just tear gas. It was like, wait, let me fact check that it was actually pepper spray. Instantly referred to with Latrell Allen, the rumor got out that he was
Latrell Allen, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and that's in the book. I was at the crime scene. I was there. And one of the moments that became notable was I interviewed Joseph Williams on Twitter. I gave him the max length video time of 2 minutes and 20 seconds to talk about what he wanted to say. And that video went viral. News outlets were doing interviews on him and referencing the fact that his video going viral is what brought them there. All of the news stations in Chicago were there. None of them were on the block to interview him. All of them were blocks away waiting for the police department to do a press conference, while I was on the actual block of the scene talking to community residents and people in that community who are there and who know what's going on. So there's that disconnect that's happening that we're trying to bridge with my work as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Because there's like the hot take, right? But Jim, whose Zoom I'm stealing to interview you, like Jim Stewart, yeah, he calls it like cold takes. And what he means by that is that, after all the internet like hype like dies down, what ends up being the remainder, or what's reserved, that we can kind of talk about amongst ourselves and our communities to try to like learn and like grow and change from. And so, right, like you can become an intermediary and then just like, well, this is what people were saying like then, and that, but like, it doesn't mean that all of that is invalid, right? It just means that, it moves quick. You mentioned this, like, I think, like, right when we started talking, like, the news cycle just moves so quickly now that it's difficult to kind of keep track of, what's valuable versus what, like, isn't valuable for people.
Yeah, and just putting it all out there, that's one of the things that's important. It's like, the best that I can do is give you the information, and whether you take it or not is your choosing.
Yeah.
But having all of that accessible, it's like, rather be prepared than be unprepared. So, I'm going out to these protests, I'm talking to these people, and not everything that I did this summer was a hit. Not everything went viral. Everything got a bunch of likes and retweets on it. But it's like, it's there. I interview as much as I can and get as many people just to craft and piece that story together. And with social media, one of the problems with it is it's algorithms.
Yeah.
Like I have almost 13,000 followers, but when I post something, 13,000 people are not going to immediately see that. So, we're also competing against that. which is one of the reasons why it was important to get this in a book, get this off of social media in a tangible form, because we are using someone else's corporation to tell our stories. We're using someone else's business to pull this information out there. But that's just the biggest thing, giving it all. And with news outlets, there's only so much they can do, in the sense of, everyone knows that when a news outlet goes out and records an event, they may get 15 seconds to cut that down and make it fit within a news time clock. There's so much news that's happening. And that's one of the biggest parts about what I'm doing, as I'm only covering the protests. I'm only covering the demonstration. So it's like, I can go to a demonstration and say, oh, I just saw that person last week. Oh, that person got arrested at the last demonstration. As a general assignment news reporter, you probably just came from a press conference. You've been covering stuff every day, so you kind of forget those nuances and those details. No news station has a reporter whose only assignment is to cover protests. They have politics, they have city hall, they have crime, but no one just for this.
That's sad though. Because people want to talk about like unity or what have you, but I have a feeling that, well, I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of the issues like would predate a Biden administration, and the fact that no one has like a protest beat, I just think that's so sad.
Yeah.
And it just like shows that, the value of the work that you're doing, because someone, if you don't cover it right, like who is going to cover it?
And it gets lost. And there are people out here, but it's like, if they don't have those platforms, no one ever sees it. So I have to look at myself as like, I have moments in here that no one else has. So am I going to just keep this and let it die with me? Or am I going to do something to make sure this sticks and make sure that this actually gets out in the public? Because people want to see it. People want to know what's going on, but it's really hard to reach the masses. So I felt this responsibility as the months went on to continue this work and continue to put this work out on a larger scale.
And I think too that it just presents such a strong like counter narrative, because you named the subtitle is joy, and like one of the things I know, I wish we would have talked about this earlier, but like how like you just documented like the swag surfing and like the footwork and the juking, and it was just so much that a lot of people don't know that about Chicago, that dance culture is such a huge part of what we do here, particularly on like the south and west side. And so I was really struck too by how how much dance culture in Chicago intersected with protest culture in Chicago.
We're a city with very strong roots, and those are the things that you see come through. Like there was at the same Freedom Square rally, there was footwork in there, right, which originated here in Chicago. So it's like these protests are so Chicago, and that's what makes them something that people all across the country are looking for, because we have pieces of that are so unique, even with the chants, even with the signs and some of the slogans and sayings. It's like all of these just represent Chicago, but we're all coming together and we're all sharing that culture and sharing that values. And that's one of the beautiful parts about this summer. Like we had people from University of Chicago, Bangra, coming out, and they taught their dance routine to everyone at the demonstration, and then they all performed it together. So sharing that culture, sharing those values, breaking bread is one of the biggest things about this summer that we saw.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to, hype up, or something that you feel like I missed that you want to talk about?
I think we got it. I thought it was going to be a 10-minute. I thought I had a 10-minute timestamp, so I don't know what he's going to do in an hour.
Yeah, we'll edit it, or not me, like Ian will edit it down. But I don't know. I love this book, and I'm a really love your work, and so I'm glad to spend an hour just talking to you about it to figure it out. And I really admire the work that you're doing to just tell the story as it is, and then it doesn't matter if it's X, Y, or Z person takes it or manipulates it. It's like you've presented the information for people to have, and
Yeah.
for people to like talk about in their communities and like change and like grow on, because that's what I feel like the hard work is going to be like in the future. Like people just talking about what's gone on over the past like 6 or 8 months, and then how do we like repair the damage on our communities and, you know, try to grow and change collectively as a city from it. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, man. This is a great conversation. I'm, glad to talk about these and, really get these points out because, it's stuff that people are interested in. So I'm hoping that with this exhibit, people can get some of this information, get some of this knowledge. I do receive some questions here and there, but being able to fully explain it is always valued and appreciated. And shout
Yeah,
out to
we really appreciate you like being on the show. Vashon Jordan Jr. The book is called Chicago Protests, A Joyful Revolution. And I love that, like, because revolutionary joy, we forget about that.